Hey everyone, this is lecture 6.1. This time we're going to be talking about sexual violence. For this one, we will first look at resource for victims, then we'll look at defining sexual violence. We'll talk about the misconceptions surrounding rape. We'll also talk about how can we attempt to profile when rape might happen. Obviously, this one has a lot of content warnings. We're going to be talking about sexual assault, which will include but not be limited to rape. We'll talk about objectification of women, attempts that are often made to justify rape, and then we'll also talk about date or acquaintance rape. Those are typically synonyms. Because this topic is intensely psychologically triggering if you have been a victim, here is the 1-800 number for the National Sexual Assault Hotline that provides 24/7 support. Additionally, Ohio State has resources for sexual assault victims, and you can access those through the Office of Institutional Equity. If you go into the slides, those highlighted words there should put you through to a hyperlink. First, let's define what exactly we mean by sexual violence, because a lot of the history of the conversation surrounding this issue is laid out in how we define it. Similar to murder, our society finds sexual assault and rape to be especially unacceptable, and that's good. It was only in 1977 when the Coker v. Georgia decision was made by the Supreme Court that the death penalty could not be applied to matters of rape. So during that era, the 1960s through about the 1980s, the death penalty was of special prominence and controversy. So it was during this time then that it was after we started having the conversation, but before many states made the death penalty unconstitutional, that the decision was made that rape would be made not able to be punished by the death penalty, is really the short of what we're saying. So today, when you hear of death penalty cases, even if they do include rape, and rape may be considered in deciding the death penalty, but the punishment is not for the assaults, the punishment is for murder itself. The way we'll define consent is the willing participation in an act or situation. In this context, we are talking about sexuality, but really this definition of consent can be applied anywhere. It should be noted that this lecture is not supposed to make you feel bad about your sexuality. There are certainly many areas of human sexuality that could be considered deviant, but aren't necessarily considered bad, right? Human sexuality is a very personal thing, but key to all of that is consent. Any sex act that does not involve full consent of all parties is defined as rape. There are many additional definitions surrounding rape, but consent is the most important and basic component there. Students brought this to my attention. There is this fun acronym of FRIES. Sexuality is freely given. It is reversible. You can say, no, you know what, I'm not into this. It is informed, as in all parties are knowing what's going to happen. It is enthusiastic, as in we are excited to be doing it. And it is specific. So we are excited to be doing this specific thing. I consent to this thing. Consent does not inherently mean consent to everything. Sexual harassment then is defined as behavior that the victim perceives to be as unwanted of a seductive or sexual nature. Like rape, sexual harassment objectifies and depersonalizes the victim while it controls and hurts them. And while sexual harassment can be appear to be more civil if you were than rape, sexual harassment has been defined differently by different generations and different subcultures in American society. One of the huge reasons why we take sexual harassment very seriously is because it has been shown to cause PTSD in victims. So it has just as much of a psychological impact, not just as much, but a similar psychological impact as certain types of sexual assaults. And both rape and sexual harassment are often complicated by power dynamics. You much more often see sexual harassment occur and people getting away with it if they are in a position of power over their victim. So now let's start defining and giving multiple definitions of rape. Really, in general, when you're looking at what is a valid definition of rape, you probably want to look at the most modern definition possible. First, let's look at the FBI legacy definition of rape, as in the definition of rape before the year 2012. It was defined as vaginal intercourse with a female forcibly and against her will. This definition is obviously kind of wildly problematic. It is highly dated, and it is heteronormative. So in this case, that definition, only women can be raped, right? Only women can only be raped vaginally through vaginal intercourse, so women can only be raped with a penis. It has to, how we define forcibly probably is implying physical violence. Many instances of rape do not actually include physical violence outside of the physical contact of the bodies, and against her will. Against her will is also somewhat of a problematic concept because it implies that consent cannot be taken back as the act is happening. How do we define female? All of this stuff. It's highly dated. It's highly heteronormative. If you are at all aware and educated in gender issues, you can see that popping off almost immediately when you look at that. So thus, we revised it in 2012, or at least the FBI did. The definition here being penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without consent of the victim. So this is a much better definition. It takes out the heteronormativity of it has to be a man raping a woman with his penis. There is area here that includes a wide scope of sex acts. Here, people who aren't women can be raped by this definition, and that's very good too. Well, it's not very good, but the definition's better. We have something we can work with. Now, the original concept of the legacy definition probably was put there to be very legally concise and together, right? Because lawyers, law enforcement, they want to be able to pin things on people very specifically so they don't have legal wiggle room around it, right? That was probably the concept of defining that incredibly specifically, but that definition was clearly made in a time when heteronormativity, all this gender stuff just was not considered. So this better definition really reflects how much we have grown as a society. Now, given this is 2012, so this is more than 10 years later, but still it is a better definition. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions surrounding rape. Perceptions of who can and can't be raped are heavily influenced by our cultural concepts of masculinity and femininity. And we saw that in that FBI legacy definition of rape we just looked at. So the traditional and flawed constructs of sexuality tell us that certain people cannot be raped by those older definitions that are kind of, well, they are based on viewing women as being the property of men. So by these definitions, men cannot be raped. Because by that definition, somebody who has a vagina is not a man. Again, incredibly heteronormative. Sex workers then, people who were then called prostitutes, cannot be raped because, well, they are already having sex with lots of people. Again, really messed up definition. It should be pointed out that modern ethical sex work is all about choice. If you do accept, and many people don't, that people who sell sex for money are making that choice to actively do that, then people can choose to not work for or have sex with certain people, right? Obviously. But by those older definitions, then people would make the argument that prostitutes couldn't be raped. That's what people would say. Additionally, then, within these flawed constructs, people would argue that women dressed in certain ways that could be deemed as sexually provocative can also not be raped, right? Because, well, quote, she was asking for it. All of those assumptions are wildly problematic, and they do put so much blame on the victim of the actual rape as opposed to blaming the person who's actually doing the raping. It should be pointed out that when rapists admit to having raped victims, they sometimes contend that the rape was quote unquote justified. So again, these are all part of what we call rape culture that we'll discuss later in this unit. Justifications that rapists give, they often say, well, they were asking for it. They shouldn't have dressed that way. They should have known better than to go to a given location, be that a bar or another place where people would be perceived as quote unquote asking for it. Rape as a punishment is often given. These, depending on the society, can be either formal or informal. In intensely patriarchal societies, usually we're not talking about the United States here, usually we're not talking about Western societies. There are some societies in which women who do bad things, women who quote unquote bad things, women who challenge gender norms, women who don't listen to their husbands or fathers, women who potentially are sexually non-conforming, right? Those people should be raped to put them in their place. That's the kind of very ugliness we look at there. Luckily, those concepts are not very present in the United States. Typically, in our country, there are informal punishments, right? So marital rape is something that does occur in the United States, especially obviously in abusive relationships where a man will have sex with his spouse to punish them, right? In some way. Corrective rape of people in the LGBTQ plus community or perceived non-heterosexuals. This is definitely an area that is filled with misconceptions and doublethink and nonsense. There are many hate crimes that occur that are rapes of gay men who are perpetrated by men that perceive themselves to be heterosexual, that from an outside perspective, absolutely appears that all parties involved are into male homosexuality, but the aggressor, the perpetrator, sees himself as straight, and he sees himself as correcting the behavior of the victim that he perceives to be gay. Very wildly, just problematic to the very core. The myth that men cannot be raped is based on a number of misconceptions, and these include thinking that a man who has an erection is inherently desiring sex. This simply is a misconception. It shows a lack of understanding of basic male anatomy. Male erections are most commonly tied to arousal, but there are any number of other biomedical causes that could cause an erection. Additionally, assuming that underage males cannot be taken advantage of. Again, we talked about power dynamics surrounding rape. Think about conceptions of a male having sex with his teacher, and we're usually thinking about high school situation, versus a female having sex with their teacher, right? A man who's had sex, or a boy who's had sex with his high school teacher, is seen as being extra virile and being extra manly, while we are more likely to consider a male teacher who has sex with a female student, as being a sex predator. The reality of the matter is that both male and female teachers that have sex with their underage students are by definition sex predators, because they are taking advantage of young people who have limited perspectives and, by definition, by being underage, the inability to consent. Now, the legal ability to consent and the social scientific or moral ability to consent, that may vary based on what the age of consent laws are in a given place, but that is a much more dynamic and troubling conversation, actually. Additionally, then, we look at heteronormative assumptions that exclude the possibility of anal sex, oral sex, or other sex acts when considering men who have been raped. So usually when a woman is anally or orally raped, that is considered rape, but due to male sexuality, due to homophobia, anal sex acts and oral sex acts are not often considered rape when they occur to men. Again, these are deeply troubling misconceptions, and luckily, if you've never heard of this kind of thing, that's good. That means it is actually fading in our society, and things are changing. So now let's look at some patterns regarding rape. This is the stuff that we would consider profiling. So when compared to serial killers, rapists are very hard to profile. It is generally agreed, though, that rapists have personality defects or emotional disturbances. However, there is disagreement about what specific personality characteristics actually cause people to rape. A major difference between a quote-unquote incidental rapist and a serial rapist include the fact that incidental rapists do not see themselves as being rapists. So when we talk about incidental rape, we're usually talking about date rape situations, those kinds of things. And this comes into a very dynamic set of behavior surrounding what we call rape culture, again, which we'll explore later on in this unit. Those people who do not consider themselves to be rapists, but actually commit an act of rape, often that is due to what's called the asymmetry of expectations, as in the differences in expectations between partners. Again, people in a sex act is a major cause of many date rapists not realizing that the act is actually non-consensual and is not rape. This is really why consent and the whole Fry's concept of consent and enthusiasm being involved there is absolutely 100% pivotal. Serial rapists do tend to have more predictable patterns, just like serial killers. However, the vast majority of rapists are actually incidental rapists, or those people that were once more commonly referred to as date rapists, even though a date isn't always involved. Additionally, rape is more about hatred of the subject than actual sexual desire. And this is especially true when we are outside of the concept of the asymmetry of the situation, when we're outside the area of different expectations. This applies to women, men, and people perceived to be in the LGBTQ plus community, including race, whoever, right? It is about, fundamentally, psychologists have shown us that rape is about hatred of a given group. It doesn't inherently have to be of a sexual nature. It can be about hatred of people of a given race, etc. And this hatred as motivation for rape, as I alluded to, may be more common among serial rapists, but also it does apply to a certain degree to incidental rapists as well, especially at the decision point of rape, right? When it passes from, and again, these passing points are murky, but when it passes from non-consent and sexual assault to actually what is considered rape, that is often that turning point is tied to hatred of the victim. There is what's known as the spillover hypothesis that states that violence to an individual causes them to become more violent in return. So an abused spouse could then abuse her children. Thus, when we're talking about people who become rapists, if somebody is a rapist or if somebody is sexually assaulted, they may become more likely to be people that assault in the future. This does not apply, obviously, to every victim of sexual assault. It doesn't even apply to all types of sexual assault, but it is one risk factor among many that may, in kind of a social dynamic way, put people at risk factors to becoming rapists. And this is especially more common among child molesters. That's kind of where the social reproduction occurs. People who are molested as children are much more likely to become molesters themselves, and that is largely due to the psychological damage that is created when somebody is molested. Many incidental rapists commit what is called acquaintance rape. So this is a rape that is committed by a person that the victims know. So let's pull that apart a little bit. So an incidental rapist may or may not know the victim. That is all incidental rape. Incidental rape meaning the rapist finds themselves in a situation where they could commit an act of rape, right? That's how we define incidental rapists. However, it becomes acquaintance rape and then also incidental rape if the person knew the person ahead of time. And then within that Venn diagram, acquaintance rape is not by definition date rape. Date rape usually is following the social structure that we call a date, right? So like a movie or going to do something, and then the rape occurs after that, because the rapist assumes that sex is implied, even if the victim is not about that. But acquaintance rape can also include like a friend, or even like a classmate, or even somebody you don't actually know very well at all. That also falls into the category of acquaintance rape. And it should be pointed out that women raped from ages of 18 to 24, 80% of the people who are the rapists were acquainted with their victims. And here we have some very troubling statistics surrounding rape that you can look at there, and there is a link there if you want to learn more about that. There are far more similarities among serial rapists and incidental rapists than there are differences. The behavior of incidental rapists, the major distinguishing point between the incidental and the serial rapist is repeating the act, right? Rape is unfortunately common in the United States. Depending on how you strictly define it, up to 22% of women ages 18 to 90 report having been forced to have sex at least once in their lives. Again, the 90-year-old is probably reporting that as the period at a time earlier in their life, but the most common age of victims then is from 16 to 20. So if somebody is going to be raped, from that 16 to 20 range is when that's most likely to occur. When does rape happen? Rape, like other crimes, is more likely to occur during summer months. It is also more likely to occur on weekends. These factors are true of many, many crimes because crimes typically involve being in the same time and place as the victim and the perpetrator being in the same time and place. But that also applies to assaults, it applies to burglaries, it applies to murder as well. Who are rapists? Well, 99% of rapists identify as being male, and that is according to a U.S. Department of Justice Violence Against Women report in the year 2002. Obviously, since 2002, conceptions of gender are a little bit different there, but I would expect still the overwhelming number of rapists to identify as being male, and usually rapists themselves, the person doing the crime, has done some drinking, right? So the victims, there is no pattern in victims drinking and them being raped. Usually it is the rapist who has been doing the drinking. And often that is, the behavior there is the rapist knowing he's going to rape and drinks a little bit of alcohol to take the edge off of that anxiety, which is absolutely justified anxiety. He should feel anxious about that because he shouldn't do it. Additionally, rapists have a certain sense of sexual entitlement. The definition there being the concept that any person is deserving sex from women categorically. This obviously, if you know anything about the incel movement, those people feel that they are being deprived of sex that they are entitled to. That's a very similar that is by definition sexual entitlement. And then rapists additionally report a certain degree of sexual relative deprivation, being the perception on behalf of the rapist that they are being sexually deprived. And that's also actually a matter of perception. A rapist who is actually quite sexually active may, regardless of how much sex they are getting compared to others, they still often report as desiring and needing more sex. That concept there is related to a criminological concept known as relative deprivation theory, but relative deprivation theory is more related to economic class. Okay, that is the end of this pretty dark lecture. If you have any questions, please just let me know.